In the winter of 1874, 6 prospectors split off from their group and traveled into the frigid wilderness of Colorado. They were headed near Breckenridge, spirited on by the lure of gold. While 6 men entered the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, only one returned alone. His name was Alfred Packer. He came back with a chilling tale of survival, murder, and cannibalism. Alfred Packer was born on January 21, 1842, in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. In the 1850s, the family moved to LaGrange County, Indiana. Albert moved to Minnesota as a teenager. He had a tense relationship with his family. He would work as a shoemaker until the American Civil War. In April of 1862, he enlisted in the Union Army, Company F of the 16th Infantry Regiment. Alfred failed to mention his epilepsy. He would often have seizures. In December, he would be honorably discharged because of his epilepsy. A few months later, in June, he would enlist in the 8th Iowa Cavalry Regiment. Again, he would suffer from seizures, and again he was discharged in April of 1863. After the Army, Alfred headed west, like so many others from the time. He did odd jobs for years, working in farming, as a teamster, in mining, and as a guide. Most people who knew Alfred did not like him. He had a bad temper, he was argumentative, and he was known to lie constantly. And he was also a thief. Alfred tried his hand at mining in the Colorado Territory, but he did not have much luck, so he moved to the Utah Territory. It was here where Alfred would meet the group of prospectors heading for Breckenridge in the Colorado Territory. Robert McGrew assembled a group of 20 prospectors in Salt Lake City. He had heard that gold was found near Breckenridge, so he put a crew together and headed towards Colorado. The team left Salt Lake City in November of 1873. Around 40 miles to the southeast, the group came across Alfred Packer near the town of Provo. After hearing that the group was going to the Colorado Territory and that they would be looking for gold in the San Juan Mountains, Alfred asked if he could join them. He stated that he knew the area well and he could act as their guide. It later proved to be a big mistake to bring Alfred along as a guide. He did not know the area well. The group made slow progress. When winter set in, the path all but disappeared, and the men had to rely on a compass instead of Alfred. The men claimed that Alfred spent his time trying to figure out how much money everyone was carrying in the group. He was sneaking rations, and he was accused of being lazy. Crew member Preston Nutter described Alfred as being a whining fraud. The crew's travel time took far longer than expected, and they started to run out of food. They survived by eating horse feed, which in the late 1800s was mainly hay, oats, corn, and barley. Things got so bad that they started contemplating eating the horses. On January 21, 1874, they reached the camp of Chief Ouray, members of the Ute tribe. Luckily for them, the natives did not attack, and Chief Ouray offered the men a place to stay for the remainder of winter, giving them food and lodging. The men were desperate to reach the gold fields in Colorado. They wanted to get there as fast as possible, since word had already spread and many prospectors were making the journey to try and strike it rich. But Chief Ouray warned the men that the mountains would be impassable due to the snow, and that no Ute would ever attempt to make the trip, and to attempt the trip would be almost certain death. The men decided to stay and regained their strength after the harsh journey to reach the Ute camp. After 1 week, 11 of the men had changed their minds. They would attempt to make it to the Los Pinos Indian Agency. It was the closest outpost to the Ute camp. Even after the stern warnings from Chief Urey, they had made up their minds. The Ute told the men about a safer path which avoided the mountains altogether, along the Gunnison River. It would take 14 days to complete. The Ute gave the men food for their journey. Alfred Packer was among this group, and he had become very unpopular. One of the men threatened to shoot him if he had tried to follow. Alfred told the group that he would go through the San Juan Mountains. He knew the way, and it would be much quicker. He convinced 5 men from the group to join him: George California Noon, Israel Swan, James Humphrey, Frank Butcher Miller, and Shannon Wilson Bell. Robert McGrew would travel with the men until the pack horses could go no further. They set off on February 9th. Both groups traveled together at first. They followed Chief Urey's route. They reached a point where the horses could not continue. Robert McGrew unloaded the supplies and then returned to the Ute camp to stay with the rest of his men, who chose to wait until spring. Both groups continued until Alfred Packer's group of 6 split off, choosing a route through the San Juan Mountains. 5 of the men would never be seen alive again. On the morning of April 16, 1874, the men at the Los Pinos Indian Agency were sitting down to eat breakfast when a disheveled man walked out of the woods holding a Winchester rifle and a coffee pot. This man was Alfred Packer. It had been over 2 months since he left the Ute camp. Inside the coffee pot was embers from the man's campfire. He had no flint or matches, so this was his only way to start a fire. The man was guided into the dining room, and he was given food. He vomited immediately, unable to hold any food down, claiming that it was from starvation from his time trapped in the woods. He asked for whiskey instead, and he began to drink. Alfred then told the men at Los Pinos what happened to him after leaving the Ute camp. Alfred claimed that he had been traveling with 5 men who hired him as a guide, and he had become snowblind while in the mountains. The men abandoned him in the woods, but before they left, Israel Swan gave him his Winchester rifle. He was alone from then on. His vision came back, and he survived by digging in the snow for roots and rosebuds. He began to starve, and he ate his leather shoes. The men at Los Pinos were confused. Alfred had been in the woods for over 2 months, eating little more than roots and rosebuds. Yet he did not look like a man that had been starving. His face was not sunken, and his body was more or less average. Alfred sold the Winchester rifle at the agency, claiming that he had no money. The justice of the peace purchased it for $10, around $280 in 2025 with inflation. He stayed for 10 days and then traveled to the supply town of Saguache. Preston Nutter, a member from the original party who stayed at the Ute camp for the winter, along with 2 others, arrived at Saguache and went to Dahlon's saloon. He spotted Alfred sitting at the bar and questioned him about the 5 other men in his party. Packer claimed that his feet had froze and a storm blew in, so the other men set up a camp and made a fire, then gave Alfred the Winchester rifle while they went to hunt and forage for food with the other rifle, but they never returned. He thought that they had abandoned him, so he continued on living off of roots and small game until he reached the agency. Preston knew that the others did not know the area, and that they would have never abandoned their guide. Alfred also had a knife that belonged to the butcher, Frank Miller. Preston knew something bad had happened, and he began fighting with Alfred at the bar. Eventually, the 2 were separated. Alfred was spending a lot of money in Saguache. He had purchased a horse for $70, around $1,900 today. He spent $100 at the saloon, around $2,800 today. and he offered to lend the owner of the saloon $300. He spent $78 at the general store. It was also said that Alfred had multiple wallets with him. Meanwhile, back at the Indian Agency, the 5 men who had taken the river route arrived. The general in charge told the men that Alfred had arrived before them and told them Alfred's story of being abandoned in the woods. They knew something was wrong. The men would have never abandoned their guide, and they found it odd that Alfred arrived with the rifle and other belongings from the men. They said Alfred could not be trusted and convinced the general to send someone to get Alfred from Saguache. Back in Saguache, Alfred had purchased his supplies, and he was getting ready to leave when a group of men from the party confronted him. At the same time, the officer from the agency arrived and stepped in. He told Alfred that they needed him as a guide to go and search for the missing men. It took some convincing, but Alfred agreed. Preston told the officer that Alfred had items belonging to the missing men, and that he had spent hundreds of dollars. Alfred had been broke when they originally picked him up in Utah. Packer arrived and had met with General Adams and the other men from his party. They questioned him about what happened. He told the same story. They then asked how he had acquired so much money to purchase the horse, supplies, and days of drinking and gambling in the saloon. Alfred claimed he got a loan from a man which he knew in Saguache. An officer was sent back to Saguache to verify his story. He asked around, and he could not find anyone in town that had lent Alfred any money. He learned that Alfred arrived with plenty of money, and he had a number of different wallets in his possession. He rode back with this information and relayed it to the general. Around this time, 2 Ute from Chief Urey's camp arrived, carrying 2 strips of human flesh which they found in the woodline just outside of the agency. Packer eventually broke, saying that he would make a full confession and claiming it would not be the first time that people had been obliged to eat each other when they were hungry. Packer's first statement said that they left the Ute camp with 14 days of rations, since that's how long the journey was supposed to take, but they quickly ran out of food. They scavenged in the snow for roots and rosebuds. He claimed he was away collecting firewood, and when he returned, Israel Swan was dead, hit in the head by a hatchet. The men were all around his body, preparing to eat him. Alfred joined in. The men found a large amount of money on his body. They split it. They then cannibalized his body and continued through the mountains. They ran out of meat 2 days later. The men decided that they would kill the butcher, Frank Miller, next. He was killed and eaten. Alfred took his rifle and they split the remainder of his money. Humphrey was killed next, then noon. Bell and Packer were the only ones left. They found little game along the path, and while camping one night, Bell attacked Packer. He defended himself, killing Bell with a blow to the head. He ate what he could and took some of the other meat for the journey ahead. He threw away the strips of human flesh when he spotted the agency. The general decided a search party needed to go out and find the remains. But every one of the prospectors did not believe the story. The search party headed out, led by agency clerk Herman Lauder. After 2 weeks, Alfred claimed that he was lost and that they had found nothing. They headed back to the agency. Alfred Packer attacked Herman Lauder with a knife on the return trip in an attempt to escape. He was quickly overpowered and arrested. He was jailed in a shed outside of the town of Saguache on the county sheriff's ranch. Alfred Packer made his first confession. He said that the men were trapped by a blizzard and they could not make it back to the Ute village. They were out of food and there was no animals to hunt. They ate their leather shoes. The men decided that the first to die of starvation would serve as food for the others.
Old Man Swan died first and was eaten by the other 5 persons about 10 days out of camp. 4 or 5 days afterwards, Humphreys died and was also eaten. He had about $133. I found the pocketbook and took the money. Some time afterwards, while I was carrying wood, the butcher was killed, as the other two told me accidentally, and he was also eaten. Bell shot California with Swan's gun, and I killed Bell. Shot him. I covered up the remains and took a large piece along, then traveled 14 days into the agency. Bell wanted to kill me with his rifle. I struck a tree and broke his gun.
In August, John Randolph, an illustrator for Harper's Weekly, found the 5 mutilated bodies of the missing men, 2 miles from Lake City, in a gulch known today as Dead Man's Gulch. The bodies had been buried in snow, but now, 4 months later, they were exposed. He drew the horrific scene that he stumbled upon and reported his findings in Lake City. A party went out to the scene. The men were decomposing, but they could tell it was murder. Hatchet marks littered their corpses, blows to the head and flesh missing from parts of the body. These findings proved that Alfred Packer had lied. All of the men had been killed around the same time, and they were in the same location, not scattered along the trail. A shelter was located a short distance from the bodies, with some food and items from the deceased men inside. Alfred had killed them before all of the food was gone. Authorities now had the bodies and the horrible scene he had left behind. But it was now August, months since Alfred's initial arrest. Unfortunately, when they returned to the ranch belonging to the county sheriff where Alfred was being held, it was found that Alfred Packer was gone. It is believed that one of the jailers was bribed and Alfred was passed keys leading to his escape. It would be years before justice would finally be served. Gene Cabazon, one of the prospectors from the original party who stayed at the Ute camp, was in Cheyenne, Wyoming on March 11, 1883. He spotted Alfred after arriving in town to purchase supplies. He introduced himself. Alfred gave the name John Schwartz. Gene went to the local authorities and told the sheriff where Packer was. He was arrested, and General Adams from the agency was notified, and he made a trip to Wyoming. He took Alfred to Denver. Alfred claimed that he originally fled because he feared mob justice. He gave a much different account this time, claiming he only killed Bell and that Bell had killed the others.
I found the red-headed man Bell, who acted crazy in the morning, sitting near the fire roasting a piece of meat which he had cut out of the leg of the German butcher Miller. The latter's body was lying the furthest off from the fire down the stream. His skull was crushed in with the hatchet. The other 3 were lying near the fire. They were cut in the forehead with the hatchet. Some had 2 or 3 cuts. I came within a rod of the fire. When the man saw me, he got up with his hatchet towards me. When I shot him sideways through the belly, he fell on his face. The hatchet fell forwards. I grabbed it and hit him in the top of the head.
He was snowed in and in order to survive had to cannibalize the men.
I went back to the fire, covered the men up, and fetched to the camp the piece of meat that was near the fire. I made a new fire near my camp and cooked the piece of meat and ate it. I tried to get away every day but could not, so I lived off the flesh of these men, the bigger part of 60 days.
Israel Swan's family said that he had $6,000 with him, around $168,000 today, giving Alfred more than enough reason to rob and murder the 5 men. Alfred was tried and convicted of the premeditated murder of Israel Swan and sentenced to death by hanging. Alfred's sentence was reversed in October 1885 by the Colorado Supreme Court. Since you could not be sentenced to death for a crime committed in Colorado if the crime happened before Colorado had officially become a state. A second trial was held. The charges were voluntary manslaughter. Alfred was convicted on June 8, 1886 for all 5 counts of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 8 years for each count, 40 years in total, the longest custodial sentence in U.S. history at the time. Alfred appealed his case multiple times and he was denied. He wrote newspapers, and Packer's friend Duane Hatch petitioned for his release, but all of his attempts had failed. Polly Pry from the Denver Post met Packer in 1901 after doing a story for him. She took it upon herself to write stories about Packer to try and change the public's feeling towards him. Petitions were signed and people wrote the governor of Colorado, Charles Thomas, asking for Packer's release. He had always refused. But for some reason, Governor Thomas decided to parole Alfred Packer as his last official act before leaving office. After 18 years in prison, Alfred Packer was released in 1901. He went to work at the Denver Post after his release. This was most likely because of Polly Pry. Alfred Packer died on April 23, 1907 at 65. In 1989, the remains of the 5 victims were located, buried at a depth of 13 inches at the base of a driveway. I want to thank you all for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.